The aim of the lesson is to help Year 12 students to understand what HSC markers are looking for in the Advanced English Module A, Comparative Study of Text and Context. The lesson involves an analysis of the rubric and the markers' feedback from the 2015 HSC. I also suggest a structure for your exam essay. The opening paragraph of the Module A rubric explains that this module requires students to compare texts in order to explore them in relation to the context. It develops students' understanding of the effects of context and questions of value. Firstly, the rubric is asking you to compare texts, and comparison requires differences and similarities between texts. Therefore, there are few exercises more beneficial than creating a simple graphic organizer where you compare and contrast the texts. The rubric then asks you to explore the texts in relation to their context. This requires you to study the ways in which the personal, historical, social, and cultural context influence the composition of and response to each text. In this module, context is key, and when you come to write your Module A essay, you need to weave analysis of context through all your paragraphs. So what is context? Context is the setting or the place and time for an event that occurs. It is the range of personal, social, historical, and cultural conditions in which a text is responded to and composed. The rubric also requires you to understand the effects of context and questions of value. This sentence is vital to success in the Module A essay. You'll need to understand that the content and form of a text reflect the context and the values of the society in which it was composed. In the same way, your response to text is influenced by the context of your own life and society. The aim of this module is that you read text critically and explore the significance of these values for different contexts. The rubric then states, each elective in this module requires the study of groups of texts which are to be selected from a prescribed text list. These texts may be in different forms or media. Here we have some key terms. When you're considering forms, you need to think about the genre and the type of text, for example, metaphysical poem or modern drama. When you're considering media, you're thinking about the physical form of the text, for example, stage performance, film, manuscript, or printed text. The rubric asks you to examine the ways in which social, cultural, and historical context influences aspects of text, or the ways in which changes in context lead to change values being reflected in text. This includes study and use of language and text, consideration of purpose and audience, and analysis of the content, values, and attitudes conveyed through a range of readings. When you're considering the purpose and audience of a text, it's vital to realize that a text may have more than one purpose. It may aim both to entertain and to confront social issues. It may include personal and/or religious growth. The purpose is closely linked to intended audience, the form, medium, and occasion of composition or publication, e.g., a poem or novel that's written on a deathbed. You also need to consider the use of language of text. In this context, language refers to verbal and non-verbal techniques used by a composer to convey meaning and create a particular effect. The key word here is techniques. You need to know the form-specific techniques for your chosen text. These techniques may include written and spoken words, gestures, staging, sound lighting, etc. The rubric also asks you to analyze the content, values, and attitudes. This requires a detailed interpretation and evaluation of the text form and content. When you're interpreting the content, you need to analyze the events and characters, but don't just retell the story. Make sure you're explaining how the content and the techniques reflect and generate the attitudes and values of the composer and his or her society. It's vital that you identify and analyze the values depicted in the text. Values are a moral code or core beliefs that society holds up as a desired standard of behavior or principle. Composers will often hold up a mirror to their own society in their text to demonstrate the core values that have been compromised by questionable behavior. In the text you're studying, are the values of honesty, compassion, moderation, faith, and/or courage being compromised? As you're studying, Ask yourself some questions about the idea of value within the text. Is a particular text inherently valuable because of its unique ideas, its control of language and form, and the power and depth of its feeling? Will each text be valued differently by readers of different ages, genders, cultural or religious backgrounds, and historical periods? Does the text allow us to understand the values of the composer and or the time in which it was composed? How does such an understanding influence our appreciation of the text? Earlier in this lesson, I said you'll need to weave analysis of context into every paragraph of your Module A essay. I know I'm repeating myself, but you've probably noticed that composers repeat important ideas, so context, context, context. Now, as well as asking yourself questions about value as you're studying, you definitely need to ask yourself questions about context. Firstly, how did the composer's social, cultural, and historical context, purpose, and audience influence their language forms and features and the ideas, values, and attitudes conveyed in their texts? Secondly, how do the perspectives presented in the text reflect the social, cultural, and historical context, perspective, and purpose of the composers? This question is particularly important if you're studying Elective 2, Intertextual Perspectives. It's vital that you understand that composers create a position of preferred understanding for the respondents through the perspectives articulated in the text. As always, the composer makes choices, and these choices result in some points of view being privileged, whilst other points of view are marginalised. Once you have finished both texts, there are some key questions that you should ask yourself. I'd recommend writing at least a paragraph on each question. What is the composer's purpose? How and why are texts products of their times? How does the social, cultural, and historical context influence the composer's choice of form, language ideas, values, and attitudes conveyed in each text? When you consider the text together, what ideas resonate? What contemporary relevance do the text's social concerns have? Perhaps the most beneficial thing you need to do is to read and or watch your texts as many times as possible. You need to know them back to front, and you'll be surprised at how your ideas and understanding of the text transform with each reading or viewing. I also think that as much as possible, you want to analyse the text together. Don't study one separately and then study the other text. You need to be able to synthesize, which means combine, your understanding of the two texts together in your essay. And this will be easier if you have regularly analysed and evaluated the two texts as a pair. It will also be beneficial for you to read up on the HSC markers feedback for the previous year on the BOSTES website. Use this feedback with the rubric as a guideline for your study and any assessment tasks that you complete. In 2015, students completing the Module A essay were good at understanding and effectively using the module to address their text pairing, demonstrating understanding of context and applying it to the question, showing awareness of contemporary relevance of the social concerns explored in the text pairings. The markers also felt that the students were good at directly answering the question asked and applying detailed, well-supported knowledge for that purpose, writing effectively in language appropriate for purpose. These final two pieces of feedback are telling you to make sure you don't just prepare an essay and regurgitate it in the exam. By all means, prepare a general response, but make sure you practice adapting this response to different questions. You have to answer the question. I can't stress enough how important this is. In 2015, the markers felt that there was a general need for students to better integrate textual forms and purpose. You need to have a really good understanding of each text form and media, and how the social, cultural, and historical context influence the composer's decision around form and media. Poor responses tend to only focus on the ideas of each text, rather than comparing and contrasting the textual forms and purpose. Students should also avoid broad, sweeping statements about context. Your teacher can help you with this. Write lots of practice essays and take your teacher's feedback on board. Students should also use metalanguage appropriately. Metalanguage is particularly important when you're writing about the techniques that the composer uses to shape meaning. If you're writing about the play, you might discuss the playwright's use of dramatic techniques such as soliloquies, asides, and monologues. but you need to make sure you use these terms correctly. Incorrect terminology will make your essay confusing. The markers also felt that there was a general need for students to address the question. Again, don't just regurgitate a pre-learned essay. Students need to use quotations effectively to support their arguments. Now, you will have to learn lots of quotes. Aim to learn 20 to 30 quotes per module. I'd recommend going through the rubric and picking out keywords. Write down these keywords as headings, and underneath each heading, write down the quotes in the text that exemplifies that particular word. Then, write these quotes on A3 sheets of paper and stick them on your walls, record them and listen to them before you fall asleep. Do whatever works for you to remember them. I also think it's really beneficial to find the key idea in each of your texts. To discover this central idea, ask yourself what the text teaches us about the human experience. This idea is closely linked to the composer's purpose, which you need to understand. Once you've worked out this key idea, the next thing you need to do is to find the quote in each text that encapsulates this key idea. Finally, the markers felt that students need to develop a full and deep awareness of the values presented in the text, and include cultural and social analysis, and recognise that the concerns raised in the text are still concerns in the current context. If you answer the questions that I've suggested in this lesson about values and context, you'll cover this. Finally, I want to suggest an essay structure that will assist you to address the requirements of the rubric. In your introduction, you should open with your thesis. To create an effective thesis, make sure you're using words or synonyms of words from both the question and the rubric. You need to sustain this thesis throughout your essay. The best way to do this is to create 2 or 3 sub-theses that build on your thesis. In your second paragraph, write about the composer's perspective, purpose, and audience. In paragraph 3, analyse the choice of language, forms, and features, and the ideas, values, and attitudes. In paragraph 4, explore the connections between characters, setting, language, forms, and ideas. And finally, in your conclusion, analyse how the relationship between the texts deepens our understanding of the values, significance, and context of each, and evaluate what contemporary relevance the text's social concerns have. I believe that following this structure will help you to analyse the text rather than simply describing them. Make sure that within each paragraph you write there is an integrated analysis of the text, and that you make insightful links between them. And that's it. You've made it. You are spoilt studying Module A because the texts you are going to study are amazing. It's hard to choose what pair of texts I would like to study/teach most. King Richard III and Looking for Richard, or Mrs. Dalloway and the Hours, or Pride and Prejudice and Letters to Alice on First Reading Jane Austen, or The Poetry of Lord Alfred Tennyson and Tiralira by the River, or The Poetry of John Donne and Wit, or Julius Caesar and the Prince, or The Great Gatsby and the Poetry of Elizabeth Browning, or Dubliners and the Poetry of Seamus Heaney, or 1984 and Metropolis. These texts are enough to send a frisson of excitement down the spine of any English teacher. To recap the main points of the lesson, I'd encourage you to read and reread, or watch and rewatch your text as many times as possible. Find the key idea or theme of the text, which will be linked to the composer's purposes, and find the quote in each text that best exemplifies this central idea. Learn the rubric, and use the language of the rubric in your thesis, sub-theses, and topic sentences. Have a planned structure for your essay to make sure you analyse rather than just describe the text. Read the HSC markers feedback from the previous year and learn from past students' strengths and their mistakes. So as the orchestra music begins to play, the final thing for me to do is to wish Year 12 students all the best with their studies and exams. Thank you so much for watching.